Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. I was almost a victim of a killer by Scare Country. Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in a small town that I'm from. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation I'm about to tell you. This changed the way that I developed friendships after that job, that's for certain. So I started the job on April Fool's Day of 2018, which was odd to me, and I had no kind of high expectations of the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and go home, as I had 2 children at home and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard, and it made pretty good money for all the duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months, and then I went on to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly until one day I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of anonymity, we'll name him JF. Well, JF was a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night, and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook. Again, another oddity. So I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did hang out. Pretty frequently. We were friends for a month at that point, and one day he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, and didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time, we were talking at a restaurant, and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's such a bitch sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take the trash out, and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a good relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions, dude. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course, we had only been friends for a month or so. I thought that he was being morbid and jokingly, so I just chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking. She really did." That concerned me. Fast forward about 8 months. They were still together, and we were all hanging out pretty regularly, and I was forgetting the things that he had told me. Then, one day we were all talking, and he seemed a little off, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude, I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me, though. He had them on her when I asked that. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" He said, "Of course," I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with his partner, and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you, then no one will." He said he diffused the situation and was trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. But if you need somewhere to go, then you can come stay with me until you get her out of the house." Fast forward to another year. He finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our job, and she asked me where he was, and I said, "I have no idea. I thought he was with you and you guys went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told him that she came by, and he called the police about it. They found her up the road with a loaded gun in her car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around, and I said no. He said, "I would take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why. He said to me, because she's out of jail and her cousins are in town trying to find the people she has personal vendettas with. You're one of them." At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and went out of town. Took 2 weeks off of work. Come to find out, that next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it happened. The reason why he knew they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard it, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that they shot. The 4th name on the list was mine. After they found the evidence and he decided to go public about the group and screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I've been very careful about who I stick my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided to not inform anyone else on it. Needless to say, we're not friends anymore, and I dodged a bullet. Literally. Creepy Apartment Chase by Swamp Bitch. This happened over 10 years ago, so excuse me if the details are a little fuzzy. When I was in high school, my friend Claire came to sleep over. We made some plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and then one of them would drive us home. We went out to our friend's apartment, had some fun, and around midnight we decided it was time for us to head back. But when we asked to be taken back, everyone said no, despite previously agreeing to bring us back. Everyone said they were too drunk or too high, so we eventually decided to just start walking back, and we would make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car on the highway, so there was no way we were walking all the way back. The apartment was towards the back of the complex, so we started making our way to the entrance. We didn't even get halfway there before a car slowly started rolling up behind us. I was 15 or 16 at the time and very naive to the ways of the world, so I wasn't too concerned, but Claire was a little smarter than me on this night. She told me to start walking faster, so we started walking faster. The car also picked up their pace behind us. Again, she told me to walk faster, so we started moving as fast as we could, and that's when the car pulled slightly in front of us and 2 of the passenger doors opened, and 2 men got out. Realizing there was no walking faster to get out of the situation, she instructed me to run now. She took off running and I followed her. She ran towards a group of parked cars and jumped behind a pickup truck, and for a minute we hoped and prayed that we weren't spotted. This is where the details get a little fuzzy. One of them must have gotten back in the car at some point, as there was only one of them following us behind the truck. We heard a set of footsteps quickly approaching, and she quietly indicated that we were now going into stealth mode. The man was on the other side of the truck that we were hiding behind, and he was circling the truck looking for us. We were slowly and quietly circling it on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. It felt like a scene from a movie or a video game. We somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected, and by the grace of the gods, he gave up and decided to go back to the car with his friends. This was our one shot to get away. She told me to run again, so we ran for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably only 15 or 20 seconds. We found the pool house area and found another spot to hide. We were hidden behind some fences and bushes and were anxiously waiting to see if they would discover us. The car pulled around to the pool house and we were biting our nails, hoping they didn't stop and get out. The car slowly drove away and we realized we hadn't been spotted. We were safe for now, but the car circled around the apartment complex for hours and hours and hours. They weren't giving up on looking for us. We were safe for the time being, but now we needed to find a way out of there. It was the middle of winter, and of course we were dressed to impress the guys we went to hang out with, so short shorts and revealing tops. We were freezing. We found a dirty, disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled under while making phone calls to find someone to pick us up. We tried contacting the guys at the apartment, but no one answered our calls, and none of our friends answered our calls. We felt completely alone and hopeless. But around 5 a.m., someone finally answered and said they would pick us up. It was the best news I'd ever heard in my life. Our friend got to the apartment complex but couldn't find the pool house. The group of men was still constantly circling around, so there was no way we were coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend was at with a little detective work, figuring out what building they were facing and what was in front of them, were there any dumpsters nearby, etc. We figured out where they were at, so we made a run for it. We spotted their car and hopped in as fast as we could, and we just said, "Go, go, go!" And our friend sped off towards the entrance. We passed the group of men on the way out, and that was the last we saw of them. We made it back around 6 a.m., just in time to sneak back in without my parents ever knowing we had even left. If Claire hadn't been with me that night, I definitely would have been abducted, raped, and possibly killed. So thankful for Claire and our friend that picked us up. But a big fuck you to the adult men we went to hang out with as teenagers, and especially fuck you to the guys that intended to harm us. On a happier note, I'm now very diligent and aware of my surroundings, and we washed that dirty Captain America blanket and shared custody of it for years after this encounter. So to the men who terrorized me and my friend in a shitty apartment complex, let's not meet again. Wailing in the Mountains by Mighty Light. My story involves a close friend from the office who I'll refer to as Edna. Edna is someone you would consider very sensitive to the otherworldly. From the stories that she shared to me and our friends, she could see ghosts and spirits since she was a child. I think she inherited it from her mother. I, on the other hand, don't consider myself sensitive, but I do acknowledge some unexplainable occasions where I could smell things that aren't there or nowhere near, like incense, flowers, or some earthly putrid smell. At other times, I hear unexplainable noises and sounds. On my own, I attribute them to an active imagination. But when Edna comes into the scene, it's a bit hard to dismiss and makes me question, what if? And this is one of our shared encounters. We were out on a 2-day team bonding activity and staying overnight on a remote mountain farm. The mountain farm was a quaint collection of huts spread out and up alongside a slopey mountainside. On the eastern side was a river which could be accessed from the farm's side gate, and onwards to the south, behind the huts, was a forest. Upon arrival, we had a bit of time before the morning activity, so we explored the grounds. One of the first things I noticed was the dark humanoid totems situated on tall wooden columns all around the place. I saw one by the river gate, and then a few more scattered in the back of the farm going to the wooded area. I just chalked it up to maybe being a bit of an ethnic embellishment to the farm. In the afternoon, we got more free time, so a few of us, including Edna, went upriver to check out a waterfall. The river wasn't too deep, so we could trek and wade across it. The walk upriver was fun since we talked amongst ourselves most of the way, but I remember feeling the rocky river bends foreboding and desolate somehow. At one point, I surmised that the waterfall could be too far for me, so I decided to give up and go back to the farm. I went back to enter through the river gate and again noted seeing one of the totems perched on the top of a column as if standing guard. By dinner, everyone was back in the farm, and Edna and I and a few more friends, one of which I'll refer to as Javin, decided to play some board games, talk, and have a few bottles of beer after dinner. We played until 1 a.m, we do love board games, and then we decided to call it a night. There were 7 or 8 of us staying in the same hut, some sleeping on beds, the others sleeping on mats. The hut was a wooden house on a slope with the north side on stilts. There were 3 beds parallel to each other and a loft with a few more sleeping mats on it. Edna chose the farthest bed, Javin in the middle, while I took the bed nearest the door. The rest took the loft, and some slept on mats on the floor. There was no air conditioner, and the winds were quite large. Overall, the hut was airy and well ventilated by the cool night air. I was able to take a few winks, and then it started. There was a high-pitched sound that was almost barely audible. Now, this being in the Philippines, there's a big chance that this was just a mountainside echo from someone singing karaoke out in the mountains. I did consider that. So I waited a few more minutes expecting the sound to abate, waiting for the next song to get cued. It didn't. The sound continued. It had an ethereal quality to it, like a soft wail which carried a feeling of longing and anguish. And the sound seemed to emanate from the earth and the surrounding woods. Oddly, it still felt like I could pinpoint the direction it came from, which to me felt like she was walking back and forth in an arc, not coming nearer or farther, always equidistant from my point of hearing. The thought of it approaching scared me, and I couldn't go back to sleep. Not to mention the wailing sound kept me awake. A few hours later, just before dawn, the sound finally stopped and I was able to sleep. Later, around 9 in the morning, I complained about not getting enough sleep, and Edna looked at me and asked if I heard it. She heard the wailing too, and it kept her from sleeping. Like me, she had just laid in bed, forced to listen to the wail until it finally stopped. We asked Javin, who was in the middle bed between ours, if he had heard anything the night before. The guy slept through it, not hearing a thing. The rest of our friends also slept peacefully. Only Edna and I, despite each being on opposite sides from Javin's bed, were able to hear it. Javin should have heard it too. That part of this baffled us. Edna and I looked around outside to see if we could get a general direction of where the sound came from. And I saw those totems, and a thought came to my mind. Could it be that those totems were perimeter guardians? It seemed like whatever was making that wailing sound couldn't get past them. I should have asked around what the totems were for, but I was too sleepy to bother and quite unnerved. The rest of the second day was nothing but activities and was unremarkable. I just put the entire situation out of my mind. We did have fun and took a dip in the small adjoining pool by the outdoor dining area, and then we finally went home. I've read stories about wailing banshees and considered maybe there was something out there just like that. Maybe it was something telling us of a warning or impending doom. No morbid events unfolded after hearing that sound, but it's still strange to me that whatever it was seemed to be circling where we were staying, but couldn't pass those strange totems. I have no idea what it was out there, and as I said, it was unnerving, and I'm glad, whatever those totems were, that their work had been done. Imaginary Friend by Ash Ketchum. For context, when I was little, my family lived in a 2-room apartment with 2 bathrooms, one in the master bedroom and one in the hallway. There was a kitchen and a living room. There was also a balcony that had those long, flexible sliding blinds that hang down vertically from their track. My bedroom was just across the guest hallway bathroom. My parents' room was at the end of the hallway, and on the other end was the kitchen, which was on the right-hand side facing toward the master bedroom. On the left side, there was a small space for a table, and behind the table was the sliding balcony door. The living room occupied the rest of that space. I spent the first 3 years of my life in that apartment, and during that time my parents claimed to have witnessed things moving on their own. Things they'd just put down on the center of tables rolling or sliding off the flat surfaces, or the vertical blinds falling off the track without any kind of influence. The most chilling thing from that time that my parents have both told me, though, was that I had an imaginary friend who I'd named Elmo. Elmo was extremely tall enough that his back would be against the wall, and he was all red. According to my dad, I would often talk to myself. When asked who I was talking to, I would reply stating that I was talking to this imaginary friend. When things were put in the wrong places, I'd say Elmo did it. If things fell off the table, Elmo did it. If the TV was left on at night, Elmo did it. Despite these creepy occurrences, nobody really batted an eye until the same year we left that apartment. I remember having vivid nightmares, a story for another time, and some sleep paralysis episodes that I had at a very young age. and I always had a distinct fear of the bathroom across the hall from my room. My little brother would also refuse to use that bathroom alone, even in the daytime. My guess is that he saw something in there, much like I had in my own room at the same age. By the end of that year, my parents had decided it was best for us to move. My father even admitted to having the home blessed before we moved out, which is saying a lot since he's normally not a superstitious or paranormal believer. He holds the same belief I do. We don't believe in the paranormal unless it shows itself to us. The fact that my father felt the need to have the apartment blessed before we moved out really makes me wonder what was there to influence that decision. But I digress. Now that all that is out of the way, here's the part that came up recently. I was babysitting my youngest brother at my grandma's house. My dad's a single parent now, so he often needs breaks from watching my youngest brother to take important meeting calls, so either myself or my grandmother will take over that role. At the time, he was either 4 or 5, and he's on the autism spectrum, and as a result, especially back then, he had a hard time communicating in full sentences. He still was and is able to get his points across with somewhat fuller sentences, but at the time he would only say 1 or 2 words at most. This particular day, I was home alone watching him until my grandma got there to take over. Normally one of my aunts would be there, but on this day it was just me and my brother. At some point, he got very upset and began trying to block off the hallway that my grandma's bathroom was in. Her hallway closet and pantry door both opened outward, so you can cover the hallway with the doors. At first, I tried to get him away from the doors and moved him to the living room, which was closer to the front door so I could investigate. I got a knife from my bag and had him wait in the living room as I went to see what could have scared him. I checked every inch of the bathroom, all 3 bedrooms in that hallway, the closets, the bathroom and the master bedroom, everything. I couldn't figure out what had spooked him. Despite not finding anything remotely threatening as I searched, I just felt really uneasy. That could of course be written off as paranoia due to the situation with me, a teenage girl alone in a house with a boy who's getting scared about something in a dim hallway with 4 rooms and 2 closets. But the feeling was eerie nonetheless. When my grandma got home, I of course asked if my brother had done this before while she was watching him. To my surprise, she said yes. She told me he'd been getting scared and saying there was a monster in his room at night. Of course, she also brought up how he was the same age as my brother when I saw and suspect was my imaginary friend Elmo, and reminded me that my grandpa, who was a religious leader of sorts in her church, was the one who blessed the apartment before we moved. Later on, I brought this experience up to my dad, who also agreed the situation was similar to what happened when we lived in that apartment all those years ago. He had also told me that my mom had seen a tall figure as well throughout her life and my childhood. But we also wrote that off as her being high on something, since she was on substances for the majority of time I've been alive. Either way, I find the whole situation just incredibly unnerving, regardless of it being some kind of spirit or some hallucination my whole family seems to be prone to seeing. Whatever the case, I hope nothing like what happened that night happens when I have to watch my brother overnight this upcoming Tuesday. Wish me luck. I'll keep you updated if a ghost comes to visit while I'm home alone. The Stranger Inside My House by Pretty Green Eyes 93. I grew up with my dad and brother. My mom died when I was 10. I was 13 at this point, and my brother was 16 and was out with his friends. I used to go out until late at night drinking in the park with my friends. My dad was an alcoholic and was always too drunk to know if I was at home or not. I had free rein and no rules or boundaries. My dad used to invite random alcoholic and drug-using strangers into the house. Often when I came home, these strangers and my dad would be passed out or asleep from too much alcohol. Or they would just barely notice I was there and I'd go straight to my room. One day I'd come back from being out with friends, and it was the early hours. I walked through the living room to go upstairs to my room, and my dad was asleep on the armchair. The guy he'd brought back was around mid-50s. I didn't recognize him. He looked at me, and something was off about him. He smiled and stared and tried to start a conversation with me, but I was keen to get to my bedroom. I went upstairs and got my pajamas on for bed and then dashed to use the bathroom. As I was walking to the bathroom, he said to me, "You look nice in those pajamas." He was smiling at me and creeping me out. I went back to my room instead of using the bathroom, and I shut the door behind me. I had a lock on my bedroom door, and I used that. He was then trying to open my bedroom door, and I was so scared because I knew something was off and that he had bad intentions. I dragged my bed across my room to block the door in case he broke the lock and then barged in. Then he was knocking at the door. "I'm just trying to say hello. Don't be so rude. Open the door." I wasn't responding. I was panicking. I was a smart 13-year-old, and I knew I was in danger. The bed was blocking the door, and it was still locked, but I could hear him pushing against the door, trying to get inside. I opened my bedroom window, and I started screaming again and again, "Help! Help, please!" at the top of my lungs. What I later found out was that my neighbor heard me, and knowing my dad was an alcoholic, was assuming something had happened to him. He came around. He must have seen that my dad was asleep, and he came up to my room, and he was knocking to get in, and I could hear his voice, a voice of safety. Although I trusted my neighbor, I was so shook up that I now just sat in the corner of my room in a ball, crying, shaking and panicked. He knocked the door open and was pushing it open against the weight of the bed. He came in and checked on me, assuming that I was hurt. He just held me while I was composing myself and was trying to explain what happened. The man was gone, but I knew he could come back any time in the future, and my dad was never sober enough for me to have ever been able to explain it to him. That was the final straw for social services, and that's the night I ended up in the care system. I ended up living with my auntie until 16, so I had it much easier than most. Were We Harassed by Bigfoot? Submitted by Tommy Z. My friends and I used to go camping quite a bit. We also did plenty of hunting in the woods near our house, and we also traveled to do both of those activities. One time, we decided to go camping not too far from our house. We had found a well-trampled site not too far from a trailhead on a flat, and one night, as we were out camping, we sat around our campfire. We began to hear a group of low-based voices kind of mumbling. They seemed to be coming down a hill behind us. And we also heard the breaking of large sticks or something. It was quite loud. When these mumbling voices drew closer to our camp, we heard them change to a more high-pitched tone. Maybe out of surprise or uncertainty. Maybe they had stumbled upon us unsuspectingly. Since we were camping in the spring, a river that was nearby was swollen, and my companions dismissed the noise as something like stream gargle echo. But when they suddenly stopped, there was a great absence of sound, and the river couldn't reproduce that noise. I then witnessed large, tall shadows moving through the trees and down the bank to a flat granite riverbank. It was right off to our left. It was then that what I can only describe as a protest dance began. I sat there and looked at my friends and said, "Guys, are we seeing Bigfoot?" No one said anything back. We all just watched these shadows down by the riverbank. These things began stomping with enough force to almost bounce me up and down on a log that I was sitting on, and these strange chants grew louder. They were more spirited and quite hysterical. This log that I was on was thick, and it supported on either side, about 7 feet apart by other logs. I'm not kidding. This seat that I was on, these logs, literally bounced while this dance was going on. We all sat in silence watching this, just hearing the fire snap, crackle, and pop. These strange voices, and this dance. This dance was loud as their feet stomped. The message of their chant, though, was unmistakable in any language. We certainly couldn't tell what they were saying, but we could feel what they meant. Get the fuck out. After a few minutes of this, I just yelled, "Okay, whatever this is, guys, doesn't want us here. Let's just pack up and go." My friends, although visibly quite shaken, were still reluctant to concede our sight. But then, abruptly the chants, now actually shouts and screams, stopped. With a few deep hoots, I considered them to be orders from what I believed to be the largest of the shadows, the pack of voices then trailed off. I didn't relax again until I heard screams much later, much farther up the valley, and then later from the mountaintop on the other side of us. I looked at my friends and said, I guess they were just passing through. We decided to continue to camp out that night, despite the fact that we were pretty scared. We had discussed leaving, but I kept pointing out that it was really dark, and we were more likely to get into trouble getting out of there, instead of just waiting it out and spending the night there. Later, just as I had settled into my tent, the guy I was in my tent with asked, "Did you hear that?" Even though I had my sleeping bag pulled back from my ears because I had heard a shuffling in exactly the place he described, I replied, "No," hoping that it would just go away. I lay there on my back, watching the fire's orange glow, and then suddenly a black silhouette eclipsed our fire and squatted in front of our tent. I felt a scream coming up into my throat, but my Adam's apple stopped it. I thought maybe if I yell, I'll frighten this creature or whatever is out there, which I'm pretty sure was Bigfoot. But then again, who knows what it was? All we knew was the shadows were really big. Whatever it was, this thing was close. I could feel its breath pushing against the nylon of our tent, and there was this weird stench filling the air. That's when I saw 5 clear digits grope at the zipper of our tent in curiosity. I could sense the way a German shepherd senses a fear of an adolescent, like this Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever it was, knew that I knew he was there, and that I was literally scared shitless. At that point, I realized I really had to piss, but there was no way I was going out there. Eventually, the shadow gave way to the familiar warm glow of the fire, and as quietly as it came, this thing just left. Sleep finally overcame all of us, and I never mentioned anything to anybody else other than my tent mate. No one had made a sound. I actually found some hairs the next morning and a few deep potholes on the trail that were pushed in by something heavy. Before this encounter, I was a skeptic. No way was Bigfoot real. No way were these weird creatures running around out in the woods. But after this, man, I know something is out there. As I look back, I also feel that I knew that they were intelligent, and maybe they were compassionate about us being there. Maybe even mischievous, or maybe they were even humoring us. Maybe they were trying to scare us away and relishing in the thought that we were scared. Perhaps it was all their fun. I'd like to think that there is a family of Bigfoot out in that camping spot. Despite us going back there, we've never seen or heard anything out there again. Maybe they were migrating. I've done a little bit of research, and that's a possibility. Whatever it was, they did walk through our campsite. They did seem like they were not happy that we were there or noticing them. And they were definitely communicating with one another, even if it was only grunts and these weird sounds they were making. Whatever they were trying to do, they got the point across to us. We didn't go back camping there for a long time. And like I said, when we did, there was no trace of them. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or on the podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. And if you'd like to take your support even further, find me on Patreon. There's a link in the description down there as well. And of course, if you're looking for some Uncle Josh True Scary Stories merch, I do have a storefront on tpublic.com. Where's the link for that? Down in the description. We're getting closer to that awesome time of the year that I so love, Halloween, right around the corner. Looking forward to the annual extravaganza, but I need your stories. If you have any true Halloween scary story that you'd like to be shared here, send it to me now. Uncle Josh, truescarystories@gmail.com. Can't wait to see what you guys send in this year. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.